All right, I am here with Prismatic Wastelands. There's already a question in the chat for you before we get into anything else. What's the story behind the bird avatar and why pink? And you may be able to, if you don't see it, there's a kind of a side tab you can sort of unlock that has the chat in there. So is there a story behind the pink bird?
The story is very kind of brief, and it's that I'm working on another game that's it's going to take me 10 years to finish. But the first thing I did when I got started was I commissioned some art from Skullboy, and in the art there's a little ostrich. And so whenever I was making my account and stuff, I kind of just used that art for everything, for my color scheme, etc. And I just used that little ostrich head as my avatar. So
have you named the ostrich? Does the ostrich have a name yet? It's a mascot. It's got to have a name.
I mean, I feel like if it's named Prismatic or something like me. I know that Hodag RPG, he likes to call me Birdman or something the equivalent. So,
like the Birdman of Alcatraz,
right? But I also just love pinks and purples. So that's kind of my go-to color scheme.
Hey, absolutely, nothing wrong. And it's a great image, by the way. It's kind of sneaky. You only show that sliver of it on your website, at least when I'm looking at it on the desktop. So let's get into it. So you are, as we talked about, you're making the rounds, making that push for any nominations. Vote for Barkeep of the Borderlands
for best supplement. That's right.
Best supplement 2023. So tell me through the story. What was the genesis?
So the genesis of Barkeep was really kind of twofold. One, I don't think there's a ton of great social adventures. There are some. I think that Luca Rayek's Witchburner is a great social adventure, but there's not a lot of great social adventures, even though so much of your classic imagination of an adventure takes place in taverns. But there's not a lot of good tavern adventures. And also at the same time, I kind of have a different take on the Keep on the Borderlands, the classic B2 module. And in my view of it, it's kind of, rather than the forces of chaos is pressing on the border, I think of it really more of as an expansionary thing, and the Keep was kind of the first thing. And so Barkeep actually takes place like 200 years after the events of B2, whenever they've thoroughly colonized the area. The Keep has grown into a lush and just rich city, and so it kind of has a nice little play on it, kind of not necessarily a critique of B2 so much as just a kind of critique of the forces of colonialism and expansion,
sure.
But in a playful way. It intends to be a kind of very funny module.
I mean, I know some people get bent out of shape on those critiques, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I'm presuming that these all have names now, that you're going to have actual named locations in the Keep. It's not just like the Barkeep and like the Tavern, or like it was in B2, they got the Castellan and his wife, like they're on Gilligan's Island.
Actually, no. And I kind of love the fact that the original B2 has the no names. I think it helped B2 first off, because B2 is kind of trying to be a generic imprint your own setting onto this.
Okay, so you kept it. All right.
I kept it, but the reasoning was I can't remember if it was Knock 1 or Knock 2 or Knock 3, but there was an article about B2, and it was saying that just because they don't have surnames listed, maybe this is a culture where it's rude. It's actually too invasive to ask somebody and to use their proper name, and everybody just kind of says, "Oh, hi Barkeep," "Oh, hi Constable," and if you're using their actual name, it's overly familiar. And I like the idea that could be the case. And I also like the idea that this is an adventure that you can drag and drop into your own setting. And I don't want you to have to rejigger the names to make it fit linguistically what your setting is like. So it kind of is twofold.
All right, that's cool. I can appreciate that. Now you've got a bunch of taverns in there. Did you find it easy to kind of riff on taverns? Was it a struggle coming up with? I think you said you have 20.
I have 20.
That's a lot of taverns.
Yeah, it wasn't a struggle for me though. I didn't come up with all the taverns. I had a ton of guest writers, so I ended up writing half of the taverns, and then I had 10 guest writers who were all just kind of prolific and well-known bloggers like Chris McDowell, Zedek, Luca Rayek, Ben Lawrence, Gus L. So a lot of well-known bloggers wrote their own taverns as well. But I didn't have trouble because I actually I went to college and to graduate school at the city with the most concentrated bars per square mile.
And what city is this?
This is Athens, Georgia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So every single one of my bars relates to a bar in Athens, Georgia, or one of them is not actually a bar. One of them is a house party that just kind of lasts forever, and that's also based on my own kind of college experiences. So a lot of it, in terms of my process for coming up with a tavern, was I would think of a bar that I would have in mind because I would already have kind of like stories and vibes and layout in my mind, and I'd be like, what is a weird fantasy twist I can put on this?
Is there a fantasy version of Buffalo Wild Wings in Barkeep on the Borderlands?
No, but pretty close. There is a fantasy version of like a Cracker Barrel.
I've never actually been to a Cracker Barrel. I've been by a number of them. That's what everyone says, but I feel like one of these days I'm gonna have to just try it out, just because, like a Shoney's. I've never been to a Shoney's. I feel like I need to go to a Shoney's. I've been to Waffle House. I've never been to Cracker Barrel.
Waffle House is great. I wouldn't even put that in the same category.
Were there any guidelines that you gave everybody? Is there anything uniting these taverns together, or was it just kind of the more eclectic the better? Just
in terms of theme, very much the more eclectic the better. So because they really do, very wildly. Like Luca's especially is probably one of the most imaginative ones, because it's not just like a bar. It is like a multiverse that you walk through, and you're going through different levels of history. And there's chances of time travel and meeting goddesses. And at the same time, there's just another one that's like a host club where, it's like a Japanese made cafe, but the male equivalent of it. So a real variety in themes, but structurally, they all fit a very similar structure because I have kind of a set of procedures for running a pub crawl. And so each one has a table of situations, basically things that happen on the way to a given pub, basically random encounters, and also a set of, I said situations, sidetracked, and then a set of situations that are happening inside the bar. Again, another random table, but it happens inside the bar. And so each one has a similar setup.
Nice. Is there a kind of a single narrative that weaves through, or is it more in that kind of sandbox style of there's just kind of plot hooks dangling around everywhere and just whatever you make of it, you make of it?
There's two, because I wanted there to be different ways that you could use this. And so the kind of primary way, and the way that the module is written, kind of with the understanding that you'll use it, is there is a grand narrative that, so this takes place, 200 years later, and they celebrate the clearing of the Caves of Chaos with an annual week-long party called the Raves of Chaos. And the monarch has fallen ill. And the antidote that was going to be delivered to him got mixed up in all the shipments to the various pubs. And so the monarch is, offered this great reward, and also, offered death to anyone who's behind it. There's a timeline kind of showing where the antidote is at any given time. There's 6 factions that all want the antidote to either, get favors from the monarch or potentially do in the monarch, and kind of are all competing as well. So there's that meta level plot. But I also wanted people to be able to pluck out just a single bar, because sometimes you're just running your game and you just want a tavern and you don't want it to be just a regular.
Who will not need a tavern at some point when the party ends up in a town that you didn't necessarily prep, and they say the first thing they're going to say they're going to town is where's the tavern? Absolutely.
And sometimes your party gets sick of the just generic, the thing you can just imagine without really even trying. It's just a generic fantasy tavern, and instead you'll pull one of these out and it's like, oh, it's actually, there's a magic show happening, but they're kind of criminals and they're scamming you, or
gotta love the magic show. So tons and tons of tables in there. What kind of stuff can you do with all the tables?
So in terms of what, so there's kind of a few different types of tables. Most of them have one table kind of telling you who is in the bar, and it's usually a D6 table, and you roll. And the amount below what you roll is who all's on there. And that's not everybody in the bar. It just gives you a few NPCs off the top of your head that you can be like, yeah, here's some people that you see.
The sort of people you notice. Oh, I should probably ask before I forget. Is it totally system neutral? Is it written for a particular system?
It is system neutral, but not system agnostic. So it's written with kind of any elf game in mind. The one we used to playtest, it was Cairn and Into the Odd. Those I think are just really simple systems for one shots, especially. So that's part of why we used those. But it really could be you could use it with 5th edition, probably with a little more work because you're gonna have to reference your monster manual. But any system really would.
Do the taverns all have CR ratings?
They don't. Yeah, if we were to actually, convert this to a 5th edition thing, it would turn in from like a 50-page or 60-page book
still be
into
writing it.
Yeah, I would still be writing it, absolutely.
So I know we talked beforehand. I don't want to pivot too hard, but I want to get into, so as I mentioned, my first, or at least one of my first exposure to your blog was an article you written, I think, prior to this coming out about Keep on the Borderlands. But before we get there, was there something about the Keep? And I know we talked about, and I want to get into a lot of stuff about the Keep on the Borderlands itself, but was there an overriding reason why you wanted to center this in the Keep and continue that story, as opposed to putting it anywhere elsewhere?
I think really the main reason is just that I did find the Keep fascinating in. So yeah, the blog post you referenced, I have an old blog post from 2021, called "The Keep on the Borderlands is Full of Lies," and its kind of premise is that the module is written. Gygax writes it kind of with the viewpoint that the Keep is a bastion of good against overwhelming chaos all around it. These heroes bravely march out to the caves and kill all these monsters, and that's a good thing. But there's enough kind of breadcrumbs in there. And I'm not saying this is an intentional by Gygax, but I think that a reader could interpret it as the module is kind of a propaganda piece, and it is sort of lying about what actually is going on, and that actually the Keep is kind of an outpost of the civilizations trying to encroach. The monsters are just kind of in their homes, especially whenever you think, if you look back at the module, it always is like, here's a family of kobolds. They have this many children, this many women. It's like, it's a home invasion whenever you go into the Caves of Chaos in the original.
So many adventures are actually just home invasions.
It's pretty true. And even like small things, like there's a wilderness encounter in the original module. There's like the Chaos Raiders. And it's this little band of outlaws, and their leader uses a bow and arrow. And I'm like, from a different perspective, this kind of sounds like Robin Hood and His Merry Men if it was written by, the Sheriff of Nottingham. Of course, he'd be like, yeah, these are forces of chaos that, are trying to spy on us. It's like, no, there's chaotic people who oppose law. So I think there are kind of two ways you can interpret it. And I liked that so much. And I liked the idea that it wasn't that the boundaries of humankind are shrinking, but rather that they're growing. And so I just kind of wanted to go with that.
It's a really neat idea. I think one of the things that maybe is underrated about that style is that, like you said, who knows what's intentional or what's not. And it probably was unintentional. But the fact is that these modules are written with gaps in them. And I'm sure some people are going to roll their eyes and say, gaps big enough to drive trucks through. And that's true. But what those gaps allow you to do is to fill it in. Since they don't spell everything out for you, in fact, they spell very little out for you, you're able to take it and kind of weave kind of whatever you want with it, as opposed to, say, a modern adventure path where you're just going to get page after page after page, basically explaining everything down in the most minute detail. It's just like, no, it's just here, there, things are happening. However you want to interpret it, go for it. And I think that's a reason why that these modules maybe will continue to be visited and revisited and reappraised, whereas I think a lot of other ones, there are certain adventure paths or whatever people will like or not like, but I don't think they're going to enter the consciousness in the same way, because they don't have that same different, they've locked down the interpretation so much that it is kind of what it is, so to speak. That makes sense.
It's a lot like Scott McCloud, who wrote Understanding Comics. He talked about how just the simple smiley face is the most kind of relatable image. You could have a hyper realistic image, but nobody can really relate. But with a smiley face, you project things onto it. The very simple game like Keep on the Borderlands, I think it's similar. I see a question that I could.
Yep.
Yes.
Is there an equivalent of the Cave of the Unknown, a bar that the players can take over, presuming that they're not trying to take over all the bars?
True. You could always try to establish a coup. So there's actually kind of a couple avenues I think that you could reasonably take over a bar. There's one called Birdcage, where the owner is not too happy with owning it. He kind of has to own it due to regulatory reasons. There's an endangered species, living in the rafters, which is a phoenix. Cool. There's a certain encounter that you could roll, and he's willing to trade identities with you. He can't sell it, but he can trade identities with the party. There's a different incident where you could potentially buy the apartment, that is being auctioned off at the steps of the courthouse. The apartment that's kind of a nonstop party, which is a fun idea, because you could walk into this party and be like, I'm actually the owner of this place. So yeah,
you
there's a
come
couple
home
ways.
and the party is in your stronghold. That'll be awesome. Like as like a stronghold random encounter, just like the party is at your place and you guys come in for adventuring, and the mini bar is all emptied out. And the wine cellars are being pillaged.
There's a tiger in the bedroom.
There's
all the classic stuff.
Exactly. So let's get on to the keep, because I feel like you're a good person to talk about it with, and it's like we mentioned, it's a very divisive module. As I said kind of before we went on, I saw someone posted about basically how it was kind of a pile of dreck and supremely overrated, and I mentioned that we could see it both ways. I can totally see if someone can find it very unsatisfactory from the sort of some of the troublesome thematic elements, depending on how you feel about that, from the fact that it feels very rudimentary, right? You mentioned that, hey, you think not giving the Castellan and those folks names is a good thing. I think other folks looking at it saying, well, now I got to just do more work. Like, why, when I come home from a hard day of doing everything, I just want to run the game. Now I pull up the module and it just says Castellan, and someone's going to ask, well, what's your name? And then, there's no name. But I think you and I share a love for the module. What's your experience with it? When did you first encounter with it? And, how did you gain this appreciation that you feel?
So I first encountered this and basically all of the older, D&D TSR modules whenever the 5th edition playtest started. So right whenever they started, they had kind of a playtest packet, and one of them was the Isle of Dread. It was like, restatted for the D&D Next 5th edition playtest, but I had never been exposed to it. I was previously a 3.5, GM, and so I assumed, like I think a lot of modern players, that the time progresses onwards and things only get better. But I read this really faithful recreation of Isle of Dread that they did for the playtest, and I was like, this is a really good module, and I ran it, and my players loved it. It spawned like an ongoing campaign for a couple of years, and so I started revisiting all of the old modules. And Keep's probably not my favorite. I think it's maybe one of the most interesting because you can project so much onto it because it's such a blank slate. I think Isle of Dread is still probably one of my favorites. And I love White Plume Mountain. I'm a big White Plume Mountain defender. It's kind of a zany and weird one. But I think they all have their own charm in a way that, if you pick up, people will say that the Lost Mines of Phandelver is a modern classic. And, I don't want to tell anybody that they're wrong, but it's not the same. It's the play culture just isn't for me. Even though I didn't start with OSR, I always started kind of with a more player agency driven and less here's an adventure path that you must follow driven kind of play style.
Yeah, Phandelver is interesting. I think it was definitely an interesting choice. Well, I guess like Keep on the Borderlands was, because you had Caves of the Unknown or whatever, Into the Unknown, whatever the first one is. And then you had Keep, and then you had, I guess Isle of Dread if you got the BX kind of box like I did. You had those three together. And I guess in a sense, I can see how Lost Mines can be seen as an update to those, because in the same way, they can be kind of really just kind of throw you out there, kind of dangerous from jump. Doesn't really, you don't really go through like there's, I know depending on how you want to play that ambush, whatever, but it can start really hard. It's just like, boom, you're in it, go. And I think that can be, kind of people can see maybe some fellowship there between those. But yeah, it isn't the same. And you don't get the same just kind of width and breadth. There's more of an expectation of the sort of linear path through. It's kind of being more on rails. Whereas the Keep, it's just there. I mean, you can wander around for a while and never even find the caves if you're not really looking for it. Isle of Dread, I like a lot. I like a lot too. I like the it's got kind of I guess another great trope, which is that sort of the shipwreck. You're sort of stuck and then muck around. I mean, I suppose I've never had anybody play it where they didn't explore the interior, but I'm sure there's some groups that are like, we're just gonna get our boat ship fixed to get the heck out of Dodge. And you can. The module does not force you to go up into the crater of the volcano if you don't want to.
And that's why I love a module. I like a module not assuming choices of the player. So I agree. Like Phandelver has a fine start. It has like a good start, but it assumes so much action that the players are going to do, and it's not necessarily railroady, but it can feel that way. And so something that I did when writing Barkeep is I don't assume anything. In fact, the timeline that I have in there is basically here's what happens if the players do nothing, just so you see how the world progresses. The GM's able to kind of intuit, okay, well, if the players do this, that's going to change, this event. but I want the world to kind of react, but also to be its own character. So, for instance, in the playtest, we never had people kind of do the same thing twice. One time, they killed the heir, the monarch's child, and they one of the bars is a hot air balloon, a tower suspended by 2 hot air balloons, and they took the balloons and fled away from the keep before the law could catch them. And it's like,
they
okay,
took
that's the end of the playtest.
Ending.
Yeah.
Nice. No, that's awesome. So did you when did you actually first run or run like Keep? So you went through, you did the play test with Isle of Dread. At what point did you kind of escape out of the orbit of Next/5e and then into OSR? And then where in that journey did you decide to go back and look at Keep?
So I had read Keep while doing 5e, but I don't think I've actually ever run Keep on the Borderlands straight, because it is such kind of just a template. It's more of just something that I will use as like a skeleton, and then I'll drape the skin on top of it. So lots of my campaigns have started with, you are in this outpost far away from civilization. There is a wilderness. There's a dungeon nearby. And that kind of framework, that skeleton, is what Keep kind of stands for in my mind. So I've done that lots of times. I did that back whenever I did 5e, and I've done that obviously a lot of times since. In terms of how I transitioned, it was basically I just kind of stopped. I over-designed 5e as I didn't like it, and so I kept doing my own house rules. And it was kind of a Ship of Theseus thing, where eventually it's like, are we even playing 5th edition anymore? You've changed every single rule.
So what's been interesting coming from a 3.5 edition, because 5th edition, I think a lot of people hitting maybe 5th edition first look at the OSR and see a simplification kind of in a good way. Did you, going from 3.5, did you at first appreciate the simplification of 5th edition, or was it not crunchy enough for you guys, or what was that? Starting from 3.5 is kind of an interesting place to start.
Yeah, I loved the simplification. So whenever the playtest, our group could not transition to 5th edition fast enough, because 5th edition is so ubiquitous, you don't even, this is not the common idea. Everybody's like, oh, it's so crunchy, there's all these classes. Like, no, compared to 3.5, it's simple. The monsters are just built for you. You don't have to build them yourself with stacking templates and doing a bunch of math. The skill system's so much cleaner, the bounded accuracy. It was really nice at the time. But I do gravitate not necessarily to more simple systems, though I do love Into the Odd. I think that's one of my favorite systems. But just systems that foreground choice and agency. That's what I'm really getting for. And 5th edition just doesn't have a ton of that. There's almost always an ideal way to do something, and that's just it takes a little bit of the choice out of it, and the choice is the fun to me.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's interesting about you're talking about Keep and being a template, because it seems like that's either something you're gonna really like about it or not. You're either gonna look at it like a framework that you can pile all your stuff onto, or you're gonna look at it and kind of say, where's the beef? There's this keep with nameless people. A few miles away, there's these caves, and then there's just like scattered things, and there isn't really a whole lot to unite them together. And one of the things I liked about that, one of those blog posts you wrote, was about that one cleric or the evil high priest that's hiding out in the keep, as somebody kind of hinting at sort of plots and in a way sort of presaging, or something you can latch onto now with a more modern approach. We're looking at factions and ticking clocks and fronts and all this stuff, is something like, here's this character who they don't really give you a lot, but there's a little bit of hint, and just the fact that they're there is something that you can kind of hook onto as, say, a modern OSR GM. Think about, oh, what are they doing? What plots are running behind the scenes that the Keep doesn't explicitly give you, but like we said before, it gives you enough gaps that you can easily fill in with all kinds of stuff, if you want to.
Yeah, I love the evil cleric, especially. So there's kind of 2 evil clerics. The one that's in the caves, but the better one, my favorite's the one who's in the city, who pretends to be nice. Everybody loves him, and he'll agree to go with the adventurers to the caves, and then once there, we'll kill them. Right. And actually, that is, and it's only hinted, because I don't have like big lore dumps in this. My adventure is too small to have a bunch of lore dumps, but it's hinted that is what happened. Because one of the large factions in Barkeep is the church. There's the Cult of Chaos, which has now become the Church of Chaos, a thriving kind of institution within the Keep. And how they've celebrate
gone mainstream.
It's gone mainstream, sort of. They still have some pretty nefarious plans. So one of the bars is theirs. They have a they have a temple underneath a speakeasy dance club that they run.
Nice. I like that. I like that a lot. I think that there are always great hints in kind of these OSR modules of stuff. And I think part of me, I mean, it's that kind of, like I said, I think when people look at it and say, well, wouldn't it have been nice if they actually gave it to me instead of just giving a kind of a one line reference. But at the same time, just them giving that to you lets you build on top of it, kind of, whatever you want to do. And like, it's this great temple. You created a whole new future. There was that other, I forget the name of it, that other guy who did a whole thing of basically the area around the keep, as if you're starting from the keep and then just giving you more like hexes outside the keep. It's been this great template, for everything. And I don't know if it would have been that way. I don't think people are using like Lost Mines of Phandelver as a template, right? It's like, it is what it is. And maybe you fix it or you don't fix it, but it's not a framework. It's just a fully, complete thing.
I mean, even other old school adventures aren't being used kind of to be remixed the same way. Even like Isle of Dread, which I think is remixable, or White Blue Mountain. I don't see a lot of games that are like, we're taking this kind of premise and we're remixing it. I think it really is just B2, and I think it's the simplicity.
Because they started to get a lot more situational, right? Because they started to get more into what we consider adventure. You got these that are barely adventures, right? But then you start getting into more narrative focused things. I think like people like the Lost City for similar things, where it's just you get lost in the desert, you end up at the spot, kind of go. But once you get into things like adventures, I think people really like, it is much more of a like, you're doing this, then you're doing that, then you're doing something else, which gives it's just less flexible.
Yeah, as soon as you walk into a volcano and there's a giant crab, you're like, okay, well, this is White Plume Mountain. You can't pretend it's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the difference. Like it's really weird, right? But you have, I mean, I know it took forever to come out, but you have Hamlet, which I think people do kind of remix and look at.
Yes, yeah.
Nobody, or not very many people, are looking at remixing Temple of Elemental Evil. I mean, it's just a slog, and and two, but the fact is that even though Hamlet's horribly kind of incomplete, it's got this moat house that goes nowhere because it's waiting for you to go on to this other adventure that's not going to appear for 8 years and whatever. But it does give you this whole settlement with this time with all kinds of detail and things. It's like, wow, this is like the perfect model for what one of these fantasy settlements can be. Along with the keep. Do you have any? What's your kind of favorite, if you have any kind of modern adventures of any stripe?
So favorite modern adventures, UVG I would have to mention, because that's kind of the thing that drew me into the OSR, and it's something that I've
tell me on that one, because I've heard it, I haven't read it yet. I hear it get mentioned a lot, but I know next to nothing about it.
Okay, so it is a different type of fantasy, because it's more of a post-apocalyptic, almost future psychedelic fantasy road trip. It is very much about traveling to weird places, long distance travel. It's kind of one of the inspirations I know is the Oregon Trail. It's like if the Oregon Trail was in this weird future where all this kind of weird science fiction stuff is happening.
Can you get and die of cholera while you're on the road?
Actually, I'm pretty sure you can. There's a whole kind of travel system built in, and it's a travel system that kind of did inspire a little bit of the procedure in Barkeep, but there is definitely some, maybe not necessarily cholera, but definitely other kind of diseases and stuff that you might, other misfortunes that may befall you on the road, for sure. Yeah. And
so is the book, is it basically a big kind of sandbox with locations? Does it use generators to come? What is it? How does it do in that?
It's a big sandbox. So it's a point crawl, and it's a very long point crawl. I think that in the second edition that just came out, there might be like 37 locations. So it's 37 points along this long road going west, and you have a lot of kind of forks in the road and choices to make, but each one is its own kind of location. There's a lot of things that tie between them, but it's mostly, some people call it a setting, but I think that the line between setting and adventure is so narrow. For instance, another favorite of mine is 1,000 Islands by ZX2. That also is kind of a setting, but also it's so instantly gameable. I'm not sure if you've read it, but
I have not. I've just read I've read the recent unpleasantness around 1,000 Islands. So
yeah, it's definitely unfortunate. But Zedek is an amazing writer, and so he's in this obviously. But before I was a friend and kind of co-creator with him, I was a fan, because he has these short sentences that are so evocative and gameable that you're like, I immediately know how I can put this into a game.
Oh, nice. I do want to check it out. There's, you know, there's so many books that come out. I'm always like, that's on my list. That's on my list.
I'm the same way.
You know, and then, you know, that one came and I was like, oh yeah. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then, yeah, this thing happened, but I do want to check it out at some point. Is Ultraviolet Grasslands, is it also a rule book, or is it built for a system, or is it agnostic? What's the...
It's odd on that. The first one kind of did have a system included in it, but did not assume you were going to use it. The next one has like one page, a brief kind of, you know, almost a Keep on the Borderlands-esque sketch of a system. But no, it kind of assumes that you're going to use really anything, except for it has its own system for the travel. I actually, whenever I ran it, started making my own system, and that's what became the Prismatic Wasteland.
Oh, so, very cool. Yeah. So how did they do point crawls? Is it what's the procedure?
There's kind of, yeah. I can't give every single step, but it's basically, you know, consuming supplies, which are based on kind of how many people are traveling with you, determine the movement. There's tables of misfortune depending on where you're traveling. There's some choices that you can make, but it's kind of just a little, it's like a checklist kind of procedure. So it's pretty easy to follow. And the locations are varied enough that you don't feel like you're going through a checklist. You feel like you're exploring something new. And
is there some impetus for traveling? Or are you just trying to get to the other side? What's the...
There's like a big D100 table of various reasons to travel. Whenever I ran it, I like to kind of have a collaborative session 0 where people are like making their characters and they decide on something. And whenever I ran it, my players, one of them, like, you know, rolled that they were a gourmand chef. And so all the others kind of glommed on that. It's like, oh, I'm the waiter. Oh, yes. And they all are like, okay, we're actually a traveling restaurant. Nice. And our big rig that we're driving around is this, like, basically a food truck. And we're going there because it's, you know, the hottest food scene in the world. And that's why we're traveling west. And we're just kind of, you know, putting this restaurant on the road and kind of making some money on the way.
Mad Max meets the bear. I like it.
Yes, yeah. Honestly, that would be an excellent adventure by itself. I want more culinary adventures. I don't know why, but I'm drawn to it.
I saw something recently where someone posted, maybe it was, I don't know if it was going to be in a zine or something, but it had a bunch of, it was going to have a bunch of tables for like cooked items. I think it's good because I'm always quickly run out of steam. It's like, yeah, it's mutton, or it's, you know, it's something in a stew. I run out of ideas really quick. What else do you like out there in terms of adventures?
In terms of adventures, I'm trying to look over my bookshelf.
Or if you've backed anything that you've gotten in recently.
I've backed so many things. I think that the new Mouse Ritter box set is really an excellent kind of
another one on my list.
Yeah. All these are just, it's a to read list for you, and that the listeners can listen along if they want. But I'm mostly just advising
folks who are in this channel regularly have heard me say that way too many times. On my list.
Yeah. So the latest Kickstarter on there, you know, they had the rules, and then they had a separate box that was basically a lot of little pamphlet adventures, but then kind of an overarching settlement or I guess setting that each adventure kind of was a different hex on. And so I thought that was a really well done kind of way to frame adventures.
I think one of the things too is I always confuse Mouse Ritter and Mouse Guard.
Yeah, always very different actually. Yeah, one's very simple and the other one is.
I was about to say, is this the one that's based on Burning Wheel? And I caught myself like, nope, that's Mouse Guard. Mouse Ritter, something else.
Into the Odd one.
So this Mouse Ritter is based on Into the Odd.
Yes, it is, and so it's very simple to run, and like I said, Into the Odd, Karen is one of my favorites. Another good adventure that I've run recently, and I actually wrote about this. I'm a contributor on the Bones of Contention blog, which is kind of a review blog, and I ran and reviewed Vampire Cruise by Amanda Lee Frank. That one was also, yeah, it's good. The premise is almost, you can already imagine where I say Vampire Cruise, because it's those two concepts. You're on a luxury cruise, and there are vampires also on the luxury cruise. But it's really well written, and I have kind of a full review on Bones of Contention if anybody wants kind of the...
Yeah, I'll check it out. What system is it
on that one? It is system agnostic, and so I used Into the Odd because it's kind of, because you're on like almost a modern cruise ship, it doesn't quite feel right to play it with a fantasy game. Into the Odd is just a little bit into the future, where you have, you know, guns and things like that I felt that it was a little more modern. And so using that was really good. And another thing I did with Into the Odd for this system, because the adventure recommends, hey, maybe you want your players to be vampires. Here's some ideas for that. And Into the Odd, the character generation, some people start the game with a magic item. And so what I thought is, if you start with a magic item, you actually are a vampire, and that magic item is your vampiric ability. Because
that's cool.
In this game, each vampire has a different ability. And so I had one.
Did you go with kind of a hidden traitor mechanism? If there was
so I had one player who was a vampire, and he had the ability to turn into a cloud of cold mist, and he was very kind of hidden about it for the first session and a half, and it was only at the dramatic moment when he had to use his power to save his friends that he revealed that he was the vampire the whole time. It was a lot of fun.
He saved his friends. He didn't consume them.
He didn't, but there was a fight with vampires. It was a whole thing. There's some romance drama going on.
Oh man, that sounds awesome. Is Into the Odd kind of your go-to system when you're not sure what you're going to run, sort of as to pick up and go?
It is. So I have two systems that I like to run. There are other systems that I like, but if I'm going to run a game, it's Into the Odd or Cairn if I wanted, or Mouse Ritter if I want to do something short, because I think that all those really lend themselves to short campaigns, 1 to 5 session campaigns. If I want to do something that I think will last for a year or more, I'm working on my own thing called Prismatic Wasteland, which it's not a more complex system, and it has a lot of similarities with Into the Odd, but I would say that it's more Baroque.
All right, well, let's get into it. So tell us more about this Prismatic Wasteland.
Yeah, so it's very much in development and still very much in playtesting, but a way in which that it's kind of Baroque is that it has more customization. It doesn't have classes, but as you level up, there are certain kind of feats that you can select, and there's a little more kind of character building with it.
Do you have feat chains, like kind of classic 3.5 kind of edition?
No, I'm not a big fan because of my experience with 3.5. I'm not a fan of feat chains, because I think that causes a lot of gating and feat taxes and stuff like that. And I really want the maximum flexibility. So I don't want you to just kind of be a fighter unless you want to just be a fighter. So if you want to be, have the kind of the wizard feat where you have a spell book, and you also want to have, some fighting feat where you're, really good with a sword, I want you to be able to make those decisions. But at the same time, they are decisions, and you kind of have limited resources. There's kind of a 2-tiered inventory. You have inventory and you have memory. There's a whole thing. It's people have to wait about 5 years for the full thing, but hopefully
I feel like it can get complicated.
stuff.
But I think that complexity when you're playing a long campaign helps give it legs.
Definitely,
at least I felt that way. I know some folks have played a long time with very simple systems, and look, I love BX, but I do find that when I'm playing more campaigns, I tend to add a little bit more complexity in there, because you don't have to worry about system mastery so much, because you're gonna have time. So you can kind of develop things further. And to your point about choices, I think it's super important, and that's something that always frustrated me about the 5th edition community, is I feel like everyone wants everything. They want to be able to do it without any sort of cost. Like, oh, well, if I do this, it should be the same as doing that. It's like, why should it be the same? This guy's just fighting things. You want to fight something, cast a spell, turn into a bat. Like, why? Like, don't you feel like these should be balanced somehow? But I know I'm painting straw men, but when I would read the stuff on it used to be on Reddit and now wherever, Lemmy, I would find that point of view kind of frustrating, because it just felt like too much sort of wish fulfillment, which is part of the gaminess part. Is you earn things and you make choices, and then you try to do the best with those choices. Of course, the problem with something like 3.5 or 3rd edition was that there are a lot of choices that could end up being dead ends, or you took the feat to get this other feat, but then the feat you took is kind of useless, and then you realize that the feat you took that feat to get isn't that great. So now you spend a bunch of feats or something not so great, and somebody else picked better feats that you had no idea were better, and now it feels like you can't do anything, and they're a whirlwind of death.
Yeah, that's the kind of complexity I'd like to kind of avoid. But yeah, I agree. A lot of 5th edition players seem to have a different play culture than I think what most OSR or post-OSR people have. And it's just, it's different. It's just not the way I want to play. I don't care about the wish fulfillment or the having an OC and making sure my OC is perfect and the best. I love actually playing a really weak or deeply flawed character. I love it whenever I'm rolling stats and one of them is incredibly low. That's always so fun for me. I'm like, oh wow, my strength is 6. So I'm like a very weak person. Like, how is that going to impact this character?
It probably helps that the stats aren't all encompassing. Whereas I think 5th edition, at least the way people play it, and I haven't played 5th edition in a long time, is that your stats are so uber important that you really can't live with. I mean, it's not even a low stat. It's just not a high stat. It's like if your prime stats below 16 to start, like you might as well give up. It's like, I mean, if I got 14, I mean, like in my OSR game, none of my players, I think, have a 14 at all amongst them. Like if you don't have a 14, then I'm screwed. Like that's kind of rough. But as you said, that's kind of what the play culture is going around, is like your stats are there's such a premium what stats you have.
It's a different philosophy around characters. I think of it as the difference between character building and character discovering. So I think a lot of 5th edition or OC style players are interested. They'll come up with the character concept first, and then they want to build that character using the tools that 5th edition or Pathfinder gives them. Whereas I think a lot of people who are more interested in OSR, post-OSR play styles are into character discovery. So they want to have, maybe if it's random tables or if it's pick lists, they want to have something to steer them into discovering a character and being like, oh, this is my character, and learning about what the character is rather than picking.
Yeah, it would be interesting. Maybe someone will write a book on it at some point. Because I remember I used to spend summers kind of by myself. So my parents were divorced, and so I'd be with my mother for the most part, and I'd go to spend summer with my dad. And I had no friends around my dad, but I would end up buying a lot of game books. I remember buying the Phaser Rip Marvel books, and I would have them for a whole summer. And I would create, I can't even count probably the amount of characters that I would because that's all day. That's all I had to do was sit there and read powers and do things. But I never like got home with a stack full of characters and then went to the game I was playing and like, okay, I'm like going through, like I would just make a new one. Like there was just some way that I feel like me and other folks who looked at the game has just changed from that kind of standpoint. The new one, it's not that bad, it's just different. But it would be something curious to see, because I don't think it's one thing. I don't think it's like, oh, video games. Like, well, I played video games. I still play video games. I don't know if it's anime, like or influences. I don't know, but it was really interesting because I feel like that is a big generational divide, I guess, that it's hard to get around because it's so core kind of to the experience, right? It's hard to really get in and play say an OSR or post OSR game if you can't accept that kind of player lethality and that kind of discovery, because they kind of go hand in hand. If you're going to maybe touch a door and then get vaporized, well, that couldn't be your favorite character, because you wouldn't want to play it. You wouldn't want to leave the tavern. You would be like, I'm not going out there. Like, I don't want this guy to die, but you have to kind of accept it. So it's sort of really interesting that just the way things have shifted. I'm definitely, like, my daughter's 9, and I'm definitely curious how she's going to take to gaming once I start to pull her in, whether I can sort of, if she'll be on the same wavelength as me, or if she'll be on the more like wavelength, like I guess other kids her age who are all about creating these sort of idealized versions that they don't want to be hurt, at least not too much, right? Don't hurt them. You hurt them a little bit, but just don't hurt them too much.
Right.
It's kind of a fascinating deal. On your Prismatic Wastelands, what were your sort of Appendix N sort of sources for the game?
So a lot of my kind of big inspirations are just other games. So like I said, UVG was the one that inspired me to start creating a system. And so it was kind of foundational, but one of the major influences is Errant by Ava Islam, who's actually an editor and contributor on Barkeep. And it is what I would consider kind of like a similarly Baroque rule set that's kind of inspired by or built off Into the Odd, but kind of gives a little bit more depth to it. So that's something that I definitely draw from. But most of it, I don't draw.
Sorry, just before you, are you going for the same kind of modular approach that she did? Because granted, there's a lot of detail there, but you don't really have to use it until kind of it comes up. Do you like that modular sort of approach? Yes,
similar, but I also like things to be kind of very tied in, which I think that Errant does as well. And I love the turn system. So kind of the overloaded encounter die that Necropraxis came up with. I love that, and that is definitely kind of a core part of both Errant and of Prismatic Wasteland. But one of my main things is just I like looking at the types of rules that are included in most games, and then just being like, how would I do this? And trying to come up with something unique from scratch. for instance, the way that I do XP is I don't think based on any other rule set. And I have a blog post on it, and it would probably take 15 minutes to walk through it. Sure. It's basically a bowl is at the table, and as you're doing various things that earn XP, you put dice into the bowl. At the end of the session, you can roll it, and if it rolls underneath, or if it rolls above somebody's level, they'll level up. So that way, it has kind of like a gradual slope. If it rolls a 1, any of them rolls a 1, you get +1 HP. So basically, no kind of counting XP. You just have kind of a bowl of dice, and then also during the session, any player can reach in, take one of the die, and use it to re-roll one of the dice they've rolled. But now they can no longer use that for XP. So it's just kind of like a simple, just a simple little thing. But it's just like I'm just trying to kind of reimagine a lot of stuff.
What happens if there's less XP at the end than people? They got to choose. They got to fight over who gets those 3 dice.
No, it goes to everybody. So everybody who's there, if it rolls, a 1, they all get +1 HP. Yeah.
So, are you adding the 3 dice together, or is it high die?
You're just looking at the individual scores. I'm not a fan of addition, so as much math as I can keep out of it, I try to keep out.
Level is 6.
No, so it's not just D6 die.
It's not just
levels
D6.
Actually.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes up to D10.
Okay. Is there some judgment when you're doing something which kind of die goes into that bowl?
There is. So things that are less impressive feats, you might put in a D4. And the reason why I have if you roll a 1, it's +1 HP, is because that way is even whenever you're level 7, you still want a D6 because it's going to give you a chance to increase your HP. So there's kind of a push and pull, and it's also the things that are more domain level tend to have the higher die sizes. So you'll get a D10 for more domain level play, kind of conquering something or managing your domain, versus the things that are kind of more low level, like such as combat. Maybe that's more of a D6. So it kind of has that kind of built-in tier that old school D&D has, where it's like, at first you're exploring dungeons, now you're also exploring the wilderness, now you have a country you're managing, and all of that is kind of built into the XP system. I like it.
All right, so back to your appendix N. So you got Errant on there. You have not Prismatic. That's your game. UVG, Ultraviolet Grasslands.
Yep. And in terms of some fiction, actually, one that is from the appendix N is Hyro's Journey. It's a 1970s science fantasy novel, and it doesn't fully hold up to today's standards of decency for fiction. But it's very pulpy. It's actually where Gygax got the idea for psionics, because it's
so that's who we have to blame. Blame that for psionics.
Well, for psionics, and also no, he's never said this in an interview, but I think also the idea of leveling up, the actual kind of like concept of not incremental growth, but like a plateau level kind of increase.
So what is this called? I'm gonna have to look that up.
Hyro's Journey, HIERO. S journey. It's post-apocalyptic, so the plot is basically this cleric from Canada is coming down to post-apocalyptic US with his telepathic moose and his talking bear companion.
Wait, hold on a minute. Did you say telepathic moose?
Telepathic moose mount, yes.
Wow.
So yeah, if that doesn't sell you, I mean, what else could I say? Yeah, the cover is like really arresting. It's like, I think one of the covers is like him, his moose, and his bear, and like on a raft over a post-apocalyptic lake. It's really zany. It's really pulpy, but I like that stuff.
I read a lot of sci-fi stuff in the 80s. I'm sure the quality is just terrible now, but they were a lot of fun. They were a lot of fun. Yeah. Just kind of kooky, crazy.
Which is why Gamma World also, and definitely another that's a huge kind of, and if anything, Prismatic Wasteland is sort of my Gamma World more than it is my D&D.
All right, so are you going a post-apocalypse?
Yes, it is very much post-apocalyptic. It's not the standard fantasy. What I like to do,
like cast Prismatic Spray and it just went wild and just they've created a Prismatic Wasteland.
Well, and Prismatic is also kind of a call to Dying Earth. Stuff, which is also I love the idea of it being far future, and so far in the future that people kind of have reverted back to pseudo medieval ways where they believe in wizards, but what the wizards are actually doing is just manipulating technology they don't understand.
I love that. Like what was it, that was it ASE?
Yes.
Forgetting what it stands for
Anomalous
now. Anomalous
subsurface environment.
Yeah.
Yes, like I think and I hope that whenever I release this as a system, although I'll be releasing it with its own adventures, that's something that you could definitely plug in there, because I think that maybe minus the clowns, I think. Maybe
I only have
those.
the first. I've only got that first level. I feel like there's a lot of people like me, because whenever I go and people mention like, I got to the first part, and there's only a few people who are like, yeah, it gets kind of kookier down from there, and like the clowns, and so I never got that far, but it really was one of those kind of eye opening, like, oh my gosh, they're really going for it with like the satellites mimicking the gods and stuff. I was like, man, that stuff is badass. But
yeah,
I never got to
love
the
that
clowns
stuff.
bit.
Yeah, not as big into the clowns, but like the people believing satellites are God. That is cool. I love magic, or sorry, I love science as magic, but I don't like magic as science. I've said this a few times.
Okay.
So I like whenever people believe that what we as players can understand as science, they all believe and treat it as magic. But I don't like whenever it's magic and it's like, they're basically treating it like science. So
kind of like the Harry Potter. I feel like kind of Harry Potter.
Yes, very much like where it's, you have your standardized spells, and it's just it drains the magic of the magical aspect. Whereas treating science fiction as magic just enlivens the magic of science.
Wow. That's
the commenter who said sci-fi with a touch of fantasy. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely don't like when I feel like the magic. I mean, I guess I'm not a huge fan of steampunk in that way, or in the way of like, or I don't know, like magic, whatever they call it, where it's like magic is like an everyday, everything is just kind of magicked. It just seems kind of, I don't know. It's almost like, well, I just feel like it's like the actual magic in terms of your imagination is kind of blown out of it when everyone's just, I mean, I always laugh, like you get to a point where you're in Harry Potter and they're giving ninth graders like necklaces that can time travel, and like everyone's cool with it. It's like, how have things turned out where you want to give a kid in high school like as like a super powerful artifact? And you're like, yeah, nothing bad's gonna happen.
But then it just turns out they're mass produced because it's such a scientific, not magical place. It's like, yeah, we just got kind of like a mold, and we're making the time traveling talismans out there in the back.
We got 5 of them in the back.
Yeah.
So it's like that, like the French castle and the Holy Grail when they're asking, like, like we've already got one, So where are you in development of Prismatic Wasteland? What's the timetable like?
Timetable is long because it is not going to be the next thing I release, or probably even the next thing after that. So
what is the next thing you're going to release?
It depends. So I'm working on 2 things concurrently, or I guess 3 things, including Prismatic Wasteland. I'm working on 2 sort of adventures kind of concurrently, and both are kind of in what I call the stewing stage. I guess maybe 3. You can tell that I have like all kinds of little fires burning. One is a little mouse ritter adventure that I think I could put out quickly, but I'm not sure if that's the next thing I want to do. And the other one is kind of a sequel to my first adventure, which was called Big Rock Candy Hex Crawl. And that one was kind of a pamphlet, a very small adventure. And I'd like to turn it into a large, kind of highly produced, big master kind of hex crawl. And just, I've thought a lot about hex crawls. One of my most popular blog posts is the hex crawl checklist. And I want to put everything that I've thought of in terms of best practices for hex crawl building, best practices for cities, and best practices for dungeons. I want to put it all in one module. And I also want to have it be this kind of candy country weirdness. So for instance, like the main dungeon is going to be the food pyramid, which is literally going to be a multi-layered dungeon where each one kind of has the theme of the old, USDA food.
Right.
So you have the grain level and the meat and cheese level.
Watch out for that broccoli level.
Exactly.
So what are your best practices for hex crawls?
So my hex, it's a two post series on my blog, and it's fairly long. So there's a lot to it. I kind of lay it out as a step-by-step kind of guide and just things that you want to include. But a lot of it goes back to things that we've been talking about tonight, and it's about making choices meaningful. So you don't want it to just be kind of here's a hex map, and going from any of these hexes takes the same amount of time. You really want it to be meaningful of whether or not you're going to take the road to the city, or if you are going to take, maybe a longer way, but through the forest. So you need factions that have, control over certain areas, because maybe you want to avoid the road because you know that you're more likely to encounter the guards from this faction that doesn't like you. So you're going to go the longer way through this forest, but maybe you don't want to go through the forest because the encounter tables. And, so it's really, designing a hex crawl is a lot like designing an entire ecosystem, because you can't just have the map. You need to have encounter tables. You need to have factions. You need to have kind of paths. There's a lot to it, to making, I think, a really good and engaging hex crawl. So that's kind of, I want to put the best practices into play. So that's my plan. Yeah.
I mean, look, I have a whole series of videos on hex crawls, and I think it's one of those misunderstood, I don't want to say underappreciated, but I think it can be difficult. I think it can be more difficult, and it can be very daunting. And it's unfortunate, but things, even the Isle of Dread, I think if someone were to look at that and say, okay, I need a template for a hex crawl, let me pull up the Isle of Dread, and you just see all the hexes and stuff on there. It's easy to go like, oh goodness, like what am I gonna? And then you read, blog posts that will say things like you need to have, 3 or 4 or 6 different things per hex, and they're looking at like, I have 250 hexes that I've counted, and now you're talking about multiplying that by 6. Like, why am I going to do all this? Like, I'm not. And either leads, I think, to doing the things like you mentioned, like, and you end up kind of shortcutting yourself, right? You end up saying, well, I can't manage that, so I want to simplify things. So I don't want there to be movement penalties. I don't want those decisions. And you end up making more of a point crawl, and then I think you end up just saying, well, let's just Indiana Jones fly over there because all this stuff is too much of a pain. But I always feel like if you can get through those first phases, maybe one by shrinking down the size of your hex crawl, like the Merry Mushmen they just posted their Kickstarter for their thing, and it's 3 hexes. Like, that's it. I mean, granted, they have paths inside there that would travel time, so maybe they're not like 6-mile hexes, but still, it's just 3 hexes, and that's it. And then when you think about, well, now if I need to have 6 things in 3 hexes, that's only 18 things. Like, that's suddenly, it's like, this is doable. Like, I can do this. And I'm sure that will do really well. But the more resources, the better, because I think it makes the game so much more richer, I think, when your wilderness is kind of meaningful. But it's hard. It's hard because, you'll see things, really good things, but man, it can just be, it's kind of like the Dungeon 23 phenomenon, where it's like, oh great, I'm going to do this every day for a year.
Which if you can and you have the willpower, all power to you.
All power to you. But
I knew on January 1st that I was not going to be able to do that.
That's why I made a helper to help people. I'm like, I'm not going to be doing this myself, but I'm here's some stuff to hopefully help someone else doing it. Because that is beyond me. Bonk said a bunch of stuff. I guess he must have played because he's shouted out Big Rock Candy Hex Crawl. And then I guess he's rereaded your series about a half a dozen times, only really possible because of how well it's all laid out. So shout out to you for the layout. And
yeah,
then he says
the hex crawl thing took a lot of outlining.
It was only able to start. Yeah, it's hex crawling. Hex crawls are amazing. Is that something that what's your favorite? So I guess kind of similar to that. What's your favorite mode of play? Do you like, what if you had to pick one between, say, like wilderness, dungeon, and I don't know, domain, or kind of social, I don't know, whatever, maybe 4. Like, do you have one aspect that you prefer? Do you like a balanced mix?
I suppose with those options, I would maybe say balanced mix, but I would say that the way that I would describe kind of my preferred style would be just a sandbox. And sometimes a dungeon, especially mega dungeons, can be a sandbox. Always a wilderness should be a good sandbox. Even a city can be a good sandbox. But what I want is just kind of an area that has kind of a sense of place. So there are places that are already kind of laid out, and things are happening. There's a sense of time. Things are changing, whether or not the players are interacting. And I want the players to be the ones who are directing where to go. So West Marches is a play style that I'm really kind of drawn to as well, because I think West Marches and Sandbox kind of are a little bit peanut butter and jelly. And I've ran a very large, like 50-person West Marches campaign before. Oh, wow. And it was not just by myself. I had 2 other kind of co-DMs. But yeah, we had 50 players, and the idea was, because we were all, still in school and scheduling was a lot easier. The idea was anytime we had kind of a quorum to meet, and there was one, GM willing to play, and there was at least 4 players, we would play.
All right. Well, here before I let you go, here's the 20,000 gold piece question. When you were doing that, did you run 1-to-1 time between sessions, AD&D Gygax style? I don't know if you're familiar with the whole 1-to-1 time.
I'm familiar. Yeah.
Did you use 1-to-1 time?
No, I'm not a fan, but I see how it could be useful. But I know that
I feel like that's the kind of game, like your kind of game is kind of the one is like the use case where I feel like it works the best. But you know, I one of the reasons I've been happily avoiding Twitter lately is because I feel like every time I turn around, I see someone like 1-to-1 time with a bunch of exclamation marks and some hashtags. I'm like, yeah, I don't care. I don't care about
Shadow
that.
Dark has raised that as a new topic of thought.
Right? Oh,
right?
they have like because she's got that. Was it like real time torch burning? Right? It's like 1 hour your torches burn.
Yeah, so
I have some groups that their torches would go out. I mean, that they would in real fiction, it'll be like they're flaming out every 5 minutes for the amount of time they're taking to make decisions. I wonder. I'm curious how people are going to do that. I mean, look, I'm all more power to those folks. I'm not as hype on that as some, but people have been, as they've been playing it with the rules, have been saying really good things about it. So I'm happy for it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think maybe as you have, like when you've seen a lot of and reading a lot of OSR and NSR sort of materials, when Shadow Dark comes along, I'm like, these are ideas that were already kind of out there, and she just did a nice job of kind of packaging them together, which is no small thing. I mean, Old School Essentials just repackaged BX. I mean, she's probably put more creation into her rule set than Necrotic Gnome did in terms of just Old School Essentials. So hey, no shade there.
And if she draws more players out of 5th edition and into the light, all power to her.
Into the light of Shadow Dark.
Into the light of Shadow Dark. Because as soon as people try their second game, then they start trying more. You know, it's kind of like if you just only ever play just D&D 5th edition, you might always stay there. But as soon as you try the second one, you're like, there's a lot of differences whenever I play a different game. You'll try a third, you'll try a fourth, and now you're an addict. And then you're going to be buying stuff like Barkeep on the Borderlands, and that's those addicts that keep
there you go
this entire thing alive.
So I put a link in the show notes if you're on YouTube, but Barkeep of the Borderlands is up for an any, so go vote early, vote often, as they say. There's no way of knowing when is the voting closed. You know, when are they gonna?
It closes announce? Saturday. I have no idea what time Saturday, but
right,
so go now, hurry,
go now.
It's best supplement, even though it's an adventure. It's labeled best supplement.
What was the thing behind that? Is it just is there guidelines, or do they not have best adventure?
They do have best adventure. It's unsure. It says that like best supplement is the parent category for best adventure, but I'm not really sure why. But it does have drinking rules and lots of other kind of rules. So I could see how somebody,
were you
especially
kind of
reading
the field, thinking like, okay, there's a lot of really strong adventures going on. It's kind of like the NBA All-Star, like when the guy's like, well, he's never going to make all-star as center, but he's played a few games at forward, so if we position him as a forward, he'll make the team. Because I know I'd be looking at the field going like, I kind of want to win if I'm going to join it, and I'm never.
I think I would have liked, I would have liked all categories, but whenever you submit the processes, you just send them the books.
Oh, you send them and they decide,
the categories fully.
Okay.
I think we should have got best cover. I think we have a great cover.
I was like, you got some nice mock-ups. You can go and check them out if you haven't gotten these yet. And there's also like, you got some other kind of kit there too. What is the before I let you go, I saw the the poster looks very usable. Is it, or is it just my imagination?
No, it is. And I think that it vastly improves the usability of the adventure because it is a point crawl adventure. And so you're going to want to lay out that poster of the city and, maybe even have like a little like Monopoly token or some sort of meeple to be where, the players are as they travel between the different pubs. So I definitely think the poster adds a lot to it. The coasters are cool. I think that is just a neat idea. Each one is a different logo of the bar.
I feel like now that people are playing more in person, these kinds of accessories are more fun. Because I mean, that coasters and everything are like everything's great, but if you're, it's just like we're on Zoom, what am I going to do? But now,
even if you have Roll20, you could. Whenever we did the playtest, we did it on Roll20, and they put the map up on Roll20 and had a token that they would move across it. So I think that cool. It definitely adds a lot to it.
I feel like this would be really good to play at a bar. Like, what system would you say would be your ideal for running Barkeep? Like, would you go into the odd? Grab Barkeep.
Probably into the odd. Yeah, I think that's especially good. Set up shop. That's a good beer and pretzels kind of system as well. You can do that at night.
But just ask the bar first before you bring your own pretzels. They may they may frown upon outside food being brought in. Well, this came together sort of haphazardly and late, but I'm glad it came together. It was an awesome talk. Hopefully you can come on again when something else have developed. I'd love to have you back. We can get deep into hex crawls, which is a favored topic of mine. Any last things you want to, things that people should go to do besides voting multiple times for the Ennies? Is there anywhere they should go besides prismaticwasteland.com? Other
than voting the appropriate amount of times, no, just continue to support OSR blogs, not just mine, but I think that blogs are the backbone of the hobby, and especially this side of the hobby. So the more you read, the better your games are going to be. And so I definitely recommend checking out as many blogs as you can, and starting your own.
Cover them on Fridays. Yes,
that's right.
Your own, and don't do it on Blogger though. See, this man, he's got his own website. He's locked that down. I swear, someday Google's just gonna send one of those messages. We decide to shut Blogger down Tuesday. Everything's being wiped, and there's gonna be panic at the disco, panic amongst the OSR and NSR. Don't do that. You get blogging platforms for a couple bucks. Just be the client so that they have to serve you. Don't be the data that they're serving to others. All right. Well, it was a blast. When I hit this thing, it's gonna play some outro music, and then we can chat for a moment. Folks, thanks so much for hanging out with us. Check out some more OSR blogs. Check out Prismatic Wasteland. Vote for some Ennies. Substack is another option. Yeah. I think Substack. Someone was saying that somebody bought Substack. I don't know what always check the ownership of these things too. One nice thing about some of them is when you can just kind of run your own server and run your own platform, then you don't have to worry about any of that because it's yours and nobody can take it away from you. When you're on something else, you never know when someone's going to come in and musk it all up for you. All right, folks, game on, everybody. I will talk to you later.